Yeah, that took us about 10 minutes to read from beginning to end. And this is masterpiece in my mind. There's so many things that, I mean, he's cooking. Okay, we're now going to move on to the last topic, which is a dissection of Nguyen's comment over here. But before we do that, we're going to take another short break. But I want to get through this because I am super, super impressed by what Nguyen wrote, and I feel like he really deserves uh, the spotlight, given the just incredible things that he's dropped on us here. So with that, I'll be back in about 60 seconds, and then we'll continue in for the final stretch. Oh, and Taylor has one other comment here. Prefer weak claims, in quotes, which is the thing that I generally share. Prefer weak claims has recently led me to far more interesting conversations with others. Yeah, same with me. I find that I can have much richer conversations with people, and not only, I think, have them understand me deeper, but I think it helps quite a bit in terms of me understanding them more clearly, is giving them a chance to articulate their views in a way that may require some nuance and some additional explanation. All right. We're at the 2-hour mark. Let's see if we can get through our point 3, point 2, point 4 actually, but let's see if we can do this in an hour or less. And what I'm going to try to do, which is going to be really hard for me, but I'm going to try, I'm going to try to read this without any comments from me once all the way through, and then we will do a deeper dive. So let's see if I can pull this off. 2 hours and 3 minutes. Here we go. This is comment from Nguyen Tendikov. All right. I recently started using Copilot in VS Code. It went okay. Haven't noticed any difference in personal effectiveness yet. I literally resisted using it for coding stuff, but eventually began applying it for generating documentation, auto-completion, small parts of code generation, but not reached vibe coding stage. I hope that will not happen. However, I have a lot of friends who have completely stopped coding and basically turned into translators with only I'm just trying to follow here, with only prompting, but it looks like some monkey pressing buttons, writing unstructured gibberish, and waiting for magic to come out of a black box. I apologize for that crude analogy. I love it, actually. In Kazakhstan, it is a large issue due to poor quality of education, by which people tend to fully rely on AI rather than thinking critically. The problem is particularly crucial among school and university students. Everyone is cheating and delegating every task to AI, leading to low literacy. Yeah. Moreover, despite a high level of digitalization in my country, the overall software quality remains low. There have been numerous incidents where national data of all citizens has been leaked. Recently, there's been a widespread trend of creating AI consultants in the form of agents on WhatsApp and Telegram for small businesses, like Q&A bots. So these agents often include built-in capabilities for dynamically generating SQL queries or some other tools, which without proper validation, command restrictions, and limits can lead to prompt injection and data leaks. AI agents can even drop entire databases. WTF. It's essential to know how to cook them right by following structured specifications and standards for such applications, like OWASP Top 10 for LLMs and so on. I agree with your opinion that vibe coding is only acceptable for well-known and low-risk domains, simple tasks, and prototypes, as you refer to them as toys. This is quite understandable considering the nature of models. They are statistical in essence and work best for problems that have already been solved many times and for which established approaches exist. Kind of reminded me of the idea of a Seinfeld framework, good practice, best practice, emerging practice, novel practice, and the unknown unknowns matrix. Brilliant. These features probably have often already been implemented numerous times before us in some way or some parts of them across various languages, libraries, frameworks, and platforms. So, this results in reinventing the wheel from scratch without considering the many problems that have already been solved or considered by predecessors. This is especially common in the JavaScript ecosystem, where there is no proper standard library like in other languages. As a result, there is a massive number of garbage, unmaintained NPM dependencies that lead to security vulnerabilities like ticking bombs. AI generated code only exacerbates it by flooding GitHub with redundant projects, copies, and wrappers around wrappers that are lacking strong justification of their existence. I have a lot to say about this, especially the effort we went through on deduplicating repos when we're doing the semi-trust for mentors learning. He's not wrong. This is a massive problem. Of course, I'm not claiming that reinventing the wheel is inherently bad. I'm not promoting authoritarian or totalitarian ways of thinking. I didn't think you were, man. Reimplementation can be valuable for learning, rethinking existing concepts, deconstructing ideas for improvement, and conducting research. But in many cases, it results in scenarios like the XKCD meme. Perhaps the root of all problems lie in how. Actually, should we check this out? Yeah, let's check this out. Let's do this. Let's just open. Okay. All right, we'll deal with this later. Perhaps the root of the problem lies in how we usually write code, even without the involvement of AI. It is the right time for us as a society to ask ourselves a few critical questions. Do we really need so much lines of code, so many programming languages, and so many platforms nowadays? I think there is a lack of unified and language agnostic approaches. Moreover, instead of refining and building upon existing solutions, developers often chase after countless new shiny things without real advancement. We even have an inside joke that every 5 years, our Kazakhstani governmental and other systems are rewritten from scratch by enthusiastic interns. The most recent wave of this hype involves switching from Java to Golang in backend parts. I believe that a path of natural evolution is far more reasonable than continuously breaking everything and starting again. Nothing is perfect, but incremental improvements are better. Amen to that, brother. On the other hand, I suppose that if AI-generated code is actually pushed to production, there should be a policy requiring all such code be marked with specific comments like "fix me," "to do," or "this was written entirely by AI, needs to be reviewed by human," like unsafe blocks in Rust, but for AI code. I think it's C# too. Some dedicated linter for enforcing this rule. In other words, code without this tag simply fails to pass checks, and mandatory requirement to write human-written tests for any AI-generated code. I like where he's going with this. Another option would be to ship such code in an isolated atomic module that doesn't break other parts of the system to avoid it becoming a future vulnerability or maintenance burden. For example, building via AIs is fine. We want to make simple in-house panel or dashboards used just by a few internal users, but not for massive online marketplace for 100,000 concurrent users. Yes, this is very much what I was trying to demonstrate with the Goju TikTok thumbnail generator, but I believe the way he's expressed it is actually far more articulate. That it's this notion of using AI for a sort of in-house or internal only projects where it's never going to see the light of day outside of the company, and its user base is going to be relatively small. It's not to say that that makes it safe or anything, but I think you don't necessarily need the same level of rigor, right? If we did, then basically all the scripts that we have in like Perl or Bash or C Shell or any of that stuff, those would have to come under the same scrutiny as production quality code. And I mean, historically, like for the last 50 plus years, we haven't really done this, at least to the best of my knowledge. So we might be able to think of AI, especially the vibe coding systems, in a similar way. Is like good enough for scripting kind of mechanical stuff, but not for like high-end systems to be used by many users. Okay, and then P.S. There are still many things I want to write about, but I think it's out of context for the video. Also, thanks for mentioning my comment in part 2 of the video, Game Series VOD. I completely forgot to leave a comment on that one. Awesome. So, yeah, that took us about 10 minutes to read from beginning to end, and this is masterpiece in my mind. There's so many things that, I mean, he's cooking. Really, really cooking. He's hitting on a whole bunch of things that it's hard to even focus on any particular issue because each one of these could be a massive deep dive. But maybe we'll start with one that's maybe the nearest and dearest to my heart, and it's something we've talked about many times, and that is this piece. So I'm going to reread this piece in blue, but this part really scares me. And by scare me, what I mean is it doesn't scare me personally. Like the sort of the outcome and the ramifications of this are likely to only reach their full potential and fruition after I'm no longer on this planet. But I feel like I can see, and many other people that are thinking about this in a similar way are seeing a similar trend and direction, which is the elision, the removal, essentially, of critical thinking. And that is terrifying because the moment that we stop critical thinking, we stop our critical thinking and we start relying on external systems to do our critical thinking for us, I think that so many things can go wrong. For example, like one of the biggest things is just imagine for a moment that we get into a space where all the humans no longer do critical thinking and it's just the AIs. So then ask yourself this question: how can humans learn to critically think again when they've lost their ability to critically think? So one might suppose that we could have the AIs teach us. Well, that would largely require the fact that the AIs themselves can actually critically think. But what we see right now is they do stuff, but I don't know that they necessarily understand stuff. And in order to do proper critical thinking, I think you actually have to understand things at a semantic level, not just a syntax level. So I was mentioning this in a prior VOD that one of the big differences between doing semantics reasoning and syntax reasoning is that the semantics reasoning is more about understanding the meaning of things, And syntax reasoning is often more about pattern matching. So even as children and people that don't have the ability to critically think, we can see patterns without critical thinking, like I think the AIs are doing that are largely syntax driven, is that they essentially look at the structure of things and then they do pattern matching, and then they can calculate like the next word. So for example, if they're reading the sentence here, I agree with your opinion that vibe, that quote vibe, they could probably intuit the next word's going to be coding. And they would be right. But notice that that's not because they understand the semantics of thing. That is because they understand syntax and they can do pattern matching. That is not the same as critical thinking or reasoning. Let's pause for a moment. Empty Code has just shown up or made a comment. Empty Code, what's going on, brother? Good to see you. Would be cool if we use an AI as a replacement for reading documents and learning, and then compare the document's content and what the AI says. You realize how less critical or detailed AI is. Yeah, that is, I like that a lot, actually. And I think that people are using them in that capacity a little bit to do things like summaries. And interestingly enough, just as a total tangent, I was meeting with one of our big investors yesterday, I think. And the AI, the Zoom AI, was listening to our conversation, and then it's going to create summaries of what's going on. It was, usually they're approximately close. And I think that this was approximately close here. But it was one of those cases where maybe 80% of it was right and 20% was wrong. But the 20% that was wrong was like, it was kind of far afield wrong. Like it wasn't just approximately close, where maybe I said, I'm going to go to 7-Eleven to go get, re-up on Coke Zero. And it instead said something like, I'm going to go to Circle K, where you can kind of see that, okay, 7-Eleven and Circle K, they're kind of close, right? So it's not that far. But it was something fundamentally different where I can't remember the exact example, but it was trying to express something that was preamble to the discussion that had nothing to do with the main content, and it made it a major player, which is crazy because it was just like me and the investor just kind of saying hello. It had nothing to do with the real business conversation. So there's definitely, I think, a lot of the misses that are happening with the AIs. I do expect that some of these will improve, but at the same time, just like we're talking about the syntax and semantics, I think that what we will likely reach is we'll reach we'll hit the critical cap of syntactic understanding and pattern matching. And then we'll realize we need more on the semantic part about like how things actually work, what things actually mean. It goes back to Jan LeCun's comment about like language models don't understand the world. And it's interesting because while I think there's some confusion about what Jan was saying, including I could be confused, I think that's actually right on point, is that they don't necessarily understand the context in which they're making these claims. So it's hard to know when they're like way off. Whereas us humans, we understand the world. And because we understand the world, we can kind of tell if we're in another we're in another dimension or not. For example, Empty Code, you just showed up and you're starting to talk. I know who you are, right? Because I've seen you on the chat. And so immediately the context and understanding how the world works, I can be like, oh yeah, what's going on, man? a language model likely wouldn't be able to do that because it doesn't understand the world. It would just be like, oh, there's a new person here, and how are you today? And then there's just sort of like this weird disconnect or something. So anyway, let's continue to see what empty code has to say. In addition to the documentation stuff, for example, even if you do a simple document like one-to-many relationship in .NET, Microsoft has a nice doc on it. Let's see what the AI says. Yeah, absolutely. And like, what parts does it get right? And then what parts does it get wrong? Since I have done this many times before, I already know the result. Oh, that's awesome. The AI will generally be right. Look at this. Empty code is using weak claims. I love it. Notice that he's not saying the AI will be right. It'll just be generally right. But as a developer, you really need to be more critical and have good control over the document. Exactly. And then on top of that, I think one of the bigger concerns that I have with AI, and this is something again that like there's not a full understanding of the ramifications of this, is with humans, when we make conjecture, especially if we're seasoned humans and we're able to think deeply about topics, we will qualify our claims. So for example, there was an episode a while back where I was talking about the Go programming language, and I was making an incorrect conclusion that Go was not a managed language. I think that's what I said. It's something like, I don't think it's managed. But before that, I said, just keep in mind, I'm a total newbie with Go, and I'm probably wrong. So don't believe anything that I say. So with this being the preamble, and then I say something that's sort of ridiculous and wrong, people understand that given the context of, I just said, I don't know what I'm talking about. Now with the AIs, one of the problems that I think we suffer is there's a level of definitiveness in the way they communicate many times that makes it really challenging to discern between something that is going to be or is correct versus something that we should look at with deeper scrutiny, because the speaker is saying, I'm not sure I fully understand this, so I'm going to share my thoughts, but you should fact check me, right? Just having that, like I think I've mentioned in the past, just having a confidence meter along with the output. So it gives you the output, but then each segment it says, I'm 50% confident about this. I'm 72% confident about this. I'm 9% confident about this. Like this, I think is super helpful because it tells us what parts we should trust, like with less skepticism, and then which parts we shouldn't. Which parts are like, this is actually pretty sketchy. We should fact check everything here. So I think that this is a super important point, and I think that there's ways to solve this. Like one of the ways that I think we've discussed in the past is you just add some sort of like a Bayesian reasoner. It's been a while since I've looked at this stuff, but you essentially use these Bayesian networks, which give you it gives you an understanding of the distribution of data that they've been trained on. And so then when they're trying to make a conclusion about new data, they can tell when the new data is within distribution of things that it's been trained on versus things that it hasn't. So then when it gives you an answer, it looks up into its like quadrant space that the systems have been trained on before getting to that point. Say, oh, I'm 82% trained on this quadrant, so I'm 82% confident. Then they go into another quadrant. It's like, I'm only 7% trained on this, so there's a bunch of holes. I could be wrong. Just that type of thing where they know kind of a priori, they know like beforehand what their training distribution is for that data. I think that can be super helpful simply because they will acknowledge when the answers they're giving are essentially in spaces that are out of distribution for what they've seen previously in their training. or if it's a continuously learned system in their training and inference. So a number of ways to do this, and I'm actually quite surprised that people are not doing this already. Like, I fully expected that at this point we would get to a case where something like Perplexity Pro, right? I'm on Perplexity. Yeah, I'm on like the Pro version, I think. Yeah, I guess I don't have research on, but I have used research. But what I would expect is something like this, is that as it's outputting this, there's like a number over here, and it's like 72% confident. And then over here, it's like 42%. And then over here in the summary, it's like 17%. And then so as you're reading it, you can just be like, okay, cool. So I know sort of what to trust and what not to trust. And then if it's a part that you really care about and it's high degree of confidence, you can be like, okay, I got this covered. But if it's something you care about and it's a low degree of confidence, then maybe you get it double checked, right? Little things like this I don't think they take too much work. Actually, I think would increase the confidence of the general public significantly over where we are right now. The downside, though, is I think if you did it this way, you would acknowledge areas of potential incompetence. And while I think the general public would actually like to know that, I think that some people in big tech like to have a view that they're infallible. Like, it's just, this is perfect. And if we show that the answers we're giving are not like 100% correct, then we're going to be scooped by the other guys, which are saying everything we say is 100% correct. Where the public generally knows nobody is 100% correct, and they would probably actually prefer using the one that tells us its degrees of confidence. Because there's so much hype. Like, it's kind of like what we're seeing with the news articles saying we're using AI for 30% of the code. And then Google's like, oh, we're doing 50% then. And then Microsoft's like, well, we're doing 60%. And then it's like, what do you're not even looking at the numbers anymore. You're just taking whatever that guy is saying, and then you're increasing it by some amount. Like, what is this? Is this like second grade recess? Right, that's kind of like what it feels like. Like, big tech has devolved into kindergarten playground time, where they're all fighting over the swing, and they're saying that they're going to go get mommy and daddy if the other person doesn't give the swing up. It's just, it's quite strange. I feel like we need to kind of stamp a little bit of this out. Okay. Back to some more comments on empty code. The main issue isn't that AI isn't completely right, but it's that it makes it look like it's completely right. Yes, exactly. And kind of closes the room for any further exploration for the user. 100%. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's that definitiveness that it's like, when I was working with the old version of Gemini, and it was like, I've fixed this problem. It's now permanently fixed. You'll never experience this again. And then I experience it again. Oh, just be honest with me, bro. Just be like, listen, I tried to fix this. I think it's good, but I've got about 52% confidence. And then I'd be like, okay, well, at least you're honest, and we can have honest discussions. And then maybe from that honesty, like, we can improve them. Right. This is part of the reason why, just as an aside, I'm literally not trying to flex here, but like, we've been thinking about this quite a bit. So if we take, I need to pick one that I think we've seen a little bit. So if we take Mentor on, Falcor DB. This may be a good one. Falcor DB, and we go into these issues, and then we pick this one that is like this potential crash bug. What you'll see is several of us have seen this. Yeah. So, and then you can upvote these, and the idea is very much like, yeah, look at this. This is interesting. So somebody upvoted and downvoted at the same time. I think the third one is the one that I liked. Yeah, this one. Anyway, so the idea here is this is also giving you a confidence score. Is that when you look at this one, for example, you can see, well, the public is a little conflicted. And then you can look at the one I just did and you can be like, well, it doesn't have many votes, but so far it's all positive. And then from that, you can get kind of a Stack Overflow intuition. This is very simple reinforcement learning with human feedback. But this also gives you this confidence score. And I do know that some of these AIs are doing this already, which is why they have this piece, right? What's tricky though is I would anticipate some of these questions have already been answered. And so they should be able to show some of this to some degree. On top of that, being like the multi-billion dollar monstrosities that they are, I think adding some sort of adaptive Bayesian network that gives you the confidence score shouldn't you couple that with the large language model. I mean, I've done this before. It's been a while, but it shouldn't be that hard for a company that has hundreds of millions of dollars in fresh capital from VCs. For just to be clear, for Merly and Mentor, when we get more capital, we'll absolutely be doing something like this. We'll be giving these confidence scores as well as this. It'll probably be like 2 numbers. We unfortunately don't have hundreds of millions of dollars in capital yet. And so as we get to that level, we'll add more of these things. Okay. So empty code's continuing. Now, why am I talking about .NET as an example? Because last summer, I used AI 24/7 to learn .NET and thought I had learned it. But this summer, I went to the main docs and oh my goodness, I was wrong. Yeah. Reading the actual documents by Microsoft is harder and more time consuming, but I personally believe that if you straight up take your time in the beginning and actually read them, they're going to make you have a way better time developing later, even learning more and easier later, right? Because you'll generally understand the structure and the flow, this type of thing. Since something like .NET is considered an enterprise framework, it's big. Yes, absolutely. On top of that, too, you'll probably get intuitions about other large frameworks, like the Java runtime environment and potentially whatever Golang is, because there's likely overlaps in those spaces. Even though their approaches may be different, many of the concepts, I suspect, may have crossover. Okay, so continuing. And since it's big, you really can't learn the fundamentals by relying on AI. It misses a lot. And good luck with learning more complicated stuff on that platform when you're not even sure about the fundamentals. Yes, totally agree. I think that the AIs can be really good at teaching you things that are potentially like more syntactic in nature. Like I was mentioning that I've been using the AIs to help me learn how to program in JavaScript and TypeScript. And since I already understand the principles, right? So in this case, it would be I understand the general .NET framework. I just don't know the exact syntax to invoke the right thing. They can be super helpful for refreshing me on the syntax. But when it comes to the concepts, I think that there's a really good chance you're hitting on something that is an excellent point, empty code. And I think that given the approach that we have today with language models that don't inherently have reasoning capabilities, I'm not sure how much we can overcome that. I think if you redesign the system so the reasoning components that have some sort of formal logic approach in it at its base, or some sort of semantic reasoner like what Mentor has, I think you can probably get a better sense of like the general fundamentals. But without that, I think it's largely, at least based on what I've seen today, it's largely a stochastic parroting exercise, where there's a lot of very, very close to correct pattern recognition, but not necessarily correct understanding of the real meaning behind the words or behind the thing that's being generated, right? Like one of the examples I think is you kind of apply in some sense the autoencoder mentality to the AIs. So autoencoders, as a refresher, they'll take an input and then they'll do this encoding phase, which is supposed to be a manifold dimensionality reduction. So it reduces the number of dimensions in this manifold. So think of a manifold as like a very complicated like n-dimensional object, and you're reducing the dimensions so you can make it smaller and smaller. So you do that through the encoding phase, and it breaks it down to these smaller pieces, and then you have a core structure. Then from that, you're going to do the decoding phase, and you're going to add all those manifold dimensions back in. Now, if the autoencoder does it correctly, then you get out what you put in. So if you give it a picture of a dog, then you get out a picture of a dog. Okay, so what's the analogy here? Well, a good example and this, by the way, is trying to tease out that you understand like semantics of things. That's sort of like one of the principles, that you can break something down to its core elements and then reproduce it based on those core elements. So along the same lines, a really interesting test to see how much AIs understand from a semantic perspective is to take something like the Goju Tech Talk thumbnail generator, right? And so you have this image that it generates. And then to take this image and give it back to the AI and ask the AI then to explain what the image is, and then compare the prompt that you gave it to the prompt output that it gave you back, and then see how close to the same thing they are, at least at a semantic level. This might give you some kind of understanding of how well it can actually reason about these things. I haven't done this experiment, but my speculation is this prompt that we gave it to get this image, if you then took the image and try to get this prompt out, the likelihood of like a one-to-one mapping is probably close to like 0%. Now, you might be able to get something closer-ish to the meta prompt. I think that might be possible. But you likely would also miss a lot of the nuance that exists, which goes back to your point, Empty Code, of how you're saying that the AI would get approximately close, but then it would struggle with the specific details of the .NET platform, and some of those details were critical to your understanding, right? Or at least that's what I was getting from what you're saying. And one more comment that Empty Code has is there are a lot of overlaps. You're not just learning one framework, but actually reading the docs and testing stuff on your own. You're really learning one area of programming at its core. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting analysis, and I think that there's lots more work to do on these things. The summaries part is like one of the things with the AI summaries is I think that it can be super useful as a time saver as long as it doesn't miss something big. The moment that it starts to miss something big, I think, is where people will start getting really skeptical on using it for a summary device. I think the analog here is possibly like the spam filter for your email, is that everybody, I think, is loving the spam filter for their email when it's eliminating spam. But the moment that it takes one of your super important emails from your partner or your boss or critical customer or something, and then moves that into the spam, I think all bets are off, right? It's like now there's this lack of trust because something that was super important is now lost. Similarly, I think if you use the summarizations and it misses something big, I think the confidence of that we would have in these things as something that gives us an accurate depiction of the story is could result in some large frustrations. I think is one way to put it. It could potentially be like a lot worse than just a little bit of frustration. So anyway, guys, this has been super fantastic. I think that, oh, yeah, let's just go back 1 second here and take another look at this guy. Oh, that's our bogus page. We want to go to this thing. Summaries.net was big since it gave you many options to do the same thing. Main issue was that the AI at best tackled one of the options. Yeah. It's going to be quite interesting to see how this evolves. And I think as all of us on, or many of us on GTT, I think we are pro AI, but I think we all have, or many of us have a healthy level of skepticism on trying to distill out where their value ends and where the hype begins. And it's hard to say because I think a lot of it is contextual, and some of it I think is actually subjective. So for example, I know some musicians that are so vehemently anti-AI because I think they're really concerned that AI is basically eliminating their jobs. And like for me, I'm not a musician, so I'm not sure, but I have heard the AI music, and I do think you can produce AI music really fast. I've actually done it myself, but I don't know that it's like necessarily of the quality that you would get, and especially the nuance that you would get from other folks. Maybe it is. I'm not entirely sure. But now you look at something like vibe coding or AI for coding, and it's interesting because I think a lot of us that are coders, we would love to have an AI that is going to help make us better, but we really, really dislike the idea that the AI is going to have the appearance of making us better, and 9 times out of 10 make us better, and then 1 time out of 10 get us fired. Right? Like that's not acceptable. I can't have the AI make me more productive 90% of the time, and then 10% of the time do something so egregiously bad, like allow for SQL injections or something in the code, and then end up having a massive security vulnerability because I pushed this and then the code reviewer didn't catch it or whatever. We even followed all the proper procedures, and now I've lost my job because I trusted the AI, because the AI told me it was confident that there were no vulnerabilities, right? Stuff like that, I think, is keeping those of us that are even like pretty excited. We're sort of seeing the promise of AI. It's keeping us a little bit at arm's length of not wanting to embrace too much for the fear that this could go bad really fast. Anyway, just continue to read on some of empty codes. Then configuring the other options and using a mix of them was a nightmare. If you didn't know, oh, right. Yeah, so it's producing empty. Are you talking about it's producing some of the code for you, and then you're trying to use some of the other code that you've written or is written somewhere else and then trying to combine them. Yeah, and if you don't know them in detail and how things work, I think that's actually one of the biggest problems that you potentially are gonna run into. Hey Marcos, um, even with the GTT thumbnail generator, what I have noticed is if I were building this myself, what I would what would happen is it would take me longer initially to build this thing. But then by the time it was built, I would understand basically everything in here. So then if there's a bug, and there's been many, it would probably take me on the order of maybe a couple minutes to be like, oh, I know where that is. Yeah, I remember that line of code. And then you've got everything cached. You understand how it all works. Whereas with the code that it's built here, because I'm a newbie in JavaScript and I didn't write any of this, I could spend time learning all of this, but it might actually take me longer to try to understand all of this. Part of the reason for this, too, I think, as all of us know, is code cannot be read sequentially like a book. That, if you have 1,000 lines of code, people might say, it's just like 1,000 lines in a book. You just read the 1,000 lines and you're good. Yeah, it doesn't exactly work like that, because I could be reading along and then I get to this point. Now, where do I go? Right? Or when I get to this function and I see that it's async, and I'm like, well, what is async? And it's like, oh, wait, can be invoked asynchronously. And it's okay, so how is this being called? And then you have to do this whole like piecing all this stuff together in your head. And you may have all the connected dots, but more likely than not, you probably don't. And so you're in a really hard spot because all the code is from something else. On top of that, you don't necessarily have the human that you could go approach and say, so Jeff, about this last section in this function, like, is this really necessary? And then Jeff can say, no, it's not necessary at all. I just added that because I was being lazy. It's actually replicated somewhere else. And you can get to the bottom of it really fast. Whereas with the AI, it may be harder to do that. So, and on top of that, what we're seeing, at least right now, is that because the AIs are producing largely slop, spaghetti code, like, I think we could all look at this and just be like, wrong, just wrong, no. And then there was something where it was doing massive never nesting. Maybe it's actually corrected. So, no, it still goes in pretty deep here, right? Like, we could look at this and say, no, that's just fix that. That's not right. But because it's producing slop and spaghetti code, it's doubly hard to understand. Like, that's part of the reason why we write code that is really simple, so that the next person that comes along can read it and understand it without much effort. They don't have to spend 200 hours just trying to read this. Because if you get to the point to where it's taking you more time to read this and understand all of this than if you would have coded it all from scratch the right way, it's hard to justify that it has value, aside from building a prototype to demo something so you can get like VC funding, right? I think that one of the cases that I think the venture capitalists love is that vibe coding gives you a very quick way to prototype ideas for new potential businesses, and a single person can potentially do it, and it gives you some validation of their idea. But I don't necessarily think that it actually does that. It just gives them sort of a straw man. Like, you don't actually know, is this thing going to scale? Is this actually doing the right thing? You just know that when I look at it like this looks pretty. Look at, and you can press these buttons and stuff, and like, isn't that cool? And like, it's just fun, right? I don't know, and it does these little outline things like look at these highlights. Like that is pretty cool. The UI flair. But I think as most of us on GTT know, this is just the code of paint that, and no disrespect to UI UX, we want really slick UIs and user experiences, but without a really solid engine for something that we're going to likely need to scale and could be used in production for hundreds of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of users, the engine part of it tends to be far more important than just like the slick beautification of the output.